about kind of the underlying view of what you both seem to take rationalism, or rational to me, which is some kind of commitment to evidence. And so I'll ask Hamza first, I think. So you're concerned with reasons for believing that the Quran is inexplicable naturalistically, so there must be a non-naturalistic explanation. And you see the lack of agreement or the absence of a naturalistic explanation of the origin of the universe as both giving you reason to believe and as making space for God. So I want to press you a little more on this God of the gaps thing that Dan brought up. I want to know how you would react if over the next 5 years the community of astronomers and cosmologists all reached consensus on a naturalistic explanation of the origin of the universe. They had, all agreed, had a good case for just natural causes explaining the origin of the universe. I just wonder which goes. Does the commitment to reason or naturalistic explanations go, or does your faith go?
This is a very good question, because it intrudes in the inner dimension of my own personal environment. And this is very good. This is the kind of question that we should be asking each other, right? See, I think in Islamic theology there's no differentiation between faith and reason. The word iman, which means faith, actually comes from the word to feel secure. And to feel secure with the belief, to have a yaqeen, a certainty of something. So in our belief, we believe our belief must be based on a form of certainty. Now, that doesn't mean now you define rationalism as scientism. There's a difference here. You don't believe in a very kind of logical, positivist, 1960s outdated view on everything must be verified. We don't have that view. We take rationalism to mean something else. And the reason we reject scientism, not science itself, but just scientism is the only way to form conclusions about life, is because, well, firstly, it's self-refuting, because the statement itself that scientism is the only way to form conclusions about life can't be proven using science. Yeah? Also, science can't prove logical truths, necessary truths like mathematics. 1 + 1 is equal to 2. And you need logical, necessary truths in order to have scientism or science in the first place. To argue the way around would be like a dog trying to catch his tail. So we say yes, it's useful and it's necessary and it's reality, but we have other aspects of methodology we use to form conclusions about life. Now, coming to your main question, there's no differentiation between what we say, the aql and the naql, which basically means the intellect and the text itself. Like Ibn Taymiyyah, one of the famous classical scholars, actually elaborated on this, that if you do think carefully and you look at reality, there's always a correspondence to the text anyway. That's our premise, that's our axiom. Just like science, the axiom is the external world exists. And you can't even prove the external world exists, because how do you know Dan Barker's brain is not on Mars and there's an alien with probes in it saying, you're in this room and you must be angry today? Yeah? How do you know he's saying that? I mean, you can't prove that. It's an axiom, it's a presupposition you need to build your worldview. So our axiom is there's no differentiation between the text and reason and text and reality in the first place. So the question itself, what would go, is like saying both of them would go. Do you see? So, but I do take your point. I would say we'd have to cross the bridge when we get there, because of my axiom, because there is no differentiation between sound reason and the text itself. So if that is my axiom, then when I see evidence, I have to approach it as it is when we get there. I think that's the best way of answering it. Is that right? Or?
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
Can I get the answer to that?
And I want to ask a similarly spirited question of Dan. So you also are concerned with being responsive to natural evidence, and the total absence of natural evidence is your main reason for saying rejecting belief in God is rational. But beyond that, you said that if you came face to face with God, you would reject him on the grounds of the existence of hell and the evil in the universe, right? He did a bad thing, and so you would reject submission to God. This is a different understanding of rational, right? The evidence responsiveness. It's for moral reasons that you would reject submission to God. And so I guess I wonder why you don't worry that that the revulsion you feel at hell, if it exists, why you don't worry that that makes you insensitive to the sorts of naturalistic explanations that Hamza wants to offer as evidence for God.
Yeah, I don't think having a moral reservation to a book like the Quran is the same thing as being angry. If that God did exist, I might choose to be angry at that God. I think what's happening here is that what I say about the Quran and Allah and Muhammad makes you angry. And so you project that anger back on me. And you think that I'm angry, therefore, because you think what I'm saying makes you angry. So psychologically, I can't be angry at something that doesn't exist. And to answer your question, science is observation. Basic science is observation. Science builds from the bottom up. Science can test hypotheses from the top down, but the hypothesis falls if the observation doesn't fit. So if I did come face to face with a deity, and there was evidence and proof of it, and I could shake his hand or whatever, then my acceptance of the existence of that being could be very positive. It doesn't follow that I would necessarily respect and admire that being. I might say, okay, Allah exists, but He's beneath my dignity of worship. I would never bow down. I would never submit to them. I would rather spend an eternity in hell with the skin being burned off my arms and being regrown than pretend to worship such a monster that would create a thing like hell. And when I say something like that, a lot of you get angry and you think, oh, Dan's angry, right? But wouldn't you be angry? Wouldn't you be angry at somebody who used threats of violence to make their point? As I said earlier, any system of thought that contains a threat of physical violence is morally bankrupt. If you want to call that anger, fine. I just call that a moral outrage at the kind of thinking that has for a book that contains thoughts like that. So I think it was Richard Feynman who said, it was Feynman, the first principle in science is that you should not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. If you come to a religion that you're born into or that you adopt, you are fooling yourself. You are deluding yourself. Science is a way to externalize and get outside of that and say, I'm going to follow science wherever it leads. Notice that Hamza did not actually answer the question. He just said we'll have to cross that bridge when it comes to it. But the question is very simple. Since we do know about thunder and lightning, Thor does not exist. Thor is gone. We have the day of the week. Thor does not exist. And if you're basing your evidence for Allah on a gap of a lack of understanding about the origin of the Big Bang, which is the argument that you presented today, was your leading argument of why it's consistent with Allah, his question is, what if that gap does close? What if it turns out that there is evidence for the multiverse? And by the way, the multiverse is admittedly a hypothesis, but so is God. They're both hypotheses. By the way, the multiverse is a simpler hypothesis than a creative being who has this complex mind. That takes more. If we're going to follow Occam's razor, a multiverse is a simpler idea than this idea of this being that exists without any explanation of its own. So you did not answer the question, and I think I did answer your question. I would believe, yes, if there were evidence, I would believe, and I would say I was wrong. I would admit it, but it doesn't follow that I would admire or respect any of those gods in the revealed religions.
This is a question for Hamza. Why would Allah depend on humans to spread His message?
Thank you for the question, dear questioner. Why would Allah depend on humans to spread His message? Well, there are two things here. First and foremost, we believe that we don't guide people, we don't bring people to truth. I mean, we believe that between the fingers of Allah is the hearts of man, and the word qalb, which is heart, means something that wavers. And our hearts always waver, don't they? And we believe that's in the control of God. So what we're saying is we don't really guide anyone. human beings, what we do as Muslims, we believe it's a duty and obligation upon human beings to present the truth. I mean, it's a natural thing that people do. If you really like your soccer team, you're going to say to everybody, you must support the soccer team. David Beckham is such a good guy. He's handsome, he's got a British accent. Okay, he sounds sometimes like a woman, but that's a different story, yeah? But the point is, he used to play for Manchester United, you know? So you gotta support that team. You know, the truth of that team. Similarly with people's worldviews, that this is like something more important because you purpose and meaning in life, so you're gonna promote it. Just like, this is why we have groups like CASH. I mean, why are they there? To come together, start discussing different ideas and maybe their particular worldview. So it's a natural thing. So God is telling us, you will be rewarded spiritually as a result of calling people to this beautiful religion. And we believe if you call people to the values of Islam, you will solve things like poverty. Like the #1 economic problem in this planet is the problem of distribution of wealth. Capitalism is a sick disease, and in my humble opinion must be eradicated, intellectually of course, as best as possible, because according to UNDP report, for example, there are 250 people who own more wealth than 2 billion people on this planet. But we have enough resources. It's an outdated geopolitical myth that there's not enough resources. According to the Food Agriculture Organization, there's enough calories on this planet to feed about 3 planets. We're greedy. That's what capitalism has done for us. You know, the professor from Maryland University, Professor Koran, actually says that the aspect of greed supports the capitalist model. Growth, growth, growth. So the point is, when we call people to this beautiful religion, not only is it saving you from this damnation, but also it's actually solving human problems, like poverty. This is why the Jews, when Islamic values like economics was implemented in history, the Jews came to our lands. For example, a rabbi, and you can find this letter in the book called Constantinople by Philip Mansell. And a rabbi writes from 1453, and he says, "Oh my brethren, oh my Jewish brothers, come to the land of the Turks, the land of the Muslims. Rich are the fruits of the earth. We're not oppressed with heavy taxes. We have freedom, and we live in peace." That's because some of the values of Islam, like economic justice, the distribution of wealth, was apparent. This is what we want for people as well. It's not just about this kind of metaphysical thing, we're going to save you from hellfire, you're going to feel closer to God, you're fulfilling your own purpose, which is all very important, but it's also about dealing with human problems. And we believe we should be having the discussions, what does Islam have to say about economics? You know, these kind of amazing things, and we believe that we have the solution, which is solving the issue of distribution of wealth. If you look into the zakat system, the alms giving and the supererogatory giving of charity, and the aspect of removing interest, and the resources of a particular land belongs to the people, not just to the elite. When you see these principles, you see an amazing economic model. So we want to call people to these values too. So to answer the question, which maybe you think I'm answering the question, is that God is asking us to call people to peace, and that's the reality. Peace in this life, and peace in the hereafter. And this is why God uses human agents to do that. And that's the sunnah, which means the way, the method of God. He's always sent messages to communicate. And what better thing to sit down with another human being and just to communicate with each other. Imagine you sent an angel or something. You can't relate to an angel. We're not angels, surely. Yeah? We relate to human beings. That's probably the most rational, logical thing to do. But hopefully I've answered the question. Thank you.
Okay, next one for Dan. What is it that keeps your common man from committing crimes if it's not fear of punishment?
There are some people that do need the fear of punishment. On the bell curve of human characteristics, there are some people over here on the tail end, the sociopaths, the psychopaths, who are not mentally healthy for either genetic or environmental reasons. We don't understand why. In fact, 4% of our species are sociopathic. We do need to build jails and have systems of justice for those people. But the general body, most of you in this room, I think, it's not the fear of punishment that's making you be good. Are you trying to tell me that if it weren't for God or for the law, you're going to go out and start raping and killing? Is that what you naturally are as a human being? We come prepackaged with instincts that are positive and negative from our ancestors. We come prepackaged with instincts toward altruism, toward empathy. We share that with other primates and other animals who also cooperate and share because it's good for the species. We're a social species. We evolved from ancestors who found it beneficial to cooperate and share and have these altruistic, empathetic impulses. Why do you hold the door open for the person next to you? Why do you, without thinking, reach to grab a baby that's falling? That happened to me once. These are natural instincts. We are naturally good people on balance. It depends where you fall in that bell curve. So we don't need laws for that. We only need laws for the extremes. If you read the headlines, it makes it look like, whoa, the human race is really violent. But actually, Steven Pinker's new book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, shows we are actually less violent now than ever. Leave human beings alone. We are a peaceful, loving, caring, sharing bunch of people. Those are headlines because they're headlines. When you see a horrible headline of some horrible thing that somebody did, a Christian or a Muslim fundamentalist or an Orthodox Jew or whoever, or an atheistic Stalin, you see them doing some horrible things, you think, what's the first thing you say? What an inhuman thing to do. We assume that the human thing to do is good, kind, sharing, compassionate, altruistic, which comes with us through our evolutionary heritage. So I can tell you right now, I'm not holding the door open for the person behind me because I'm afraid I'm going to be punished if I don't, or because I want reciprocal altruism from that person if I don't do that. By the way, there are other studies that contradict the studies you show about charity and the religious. George Barna, for example, he's a born-again Christian, has studied born-again Christians, and he says there's no difference. In fact, atheists and agnostics are underrepresented in prisons. And besides, it's irrelevant. If some people do need religion to be good, to be charitable, that kind of diminishes their moral impulse for being good because they're afraid of going to hell, or because they want to get rewarded in a heaven forever. But the average believer, it's kind of like saying, oh, look at how the behavior of children improves dramatically during the middle weeks of the month of December. The promise of Santa Claus, and look at how things improve. Well, if you need that, well then by all means let's believe in Santa Claus, because belief in Santa Claus improves the behavior of children. Does that mean Santa Claus is real? That's a totally different question. If belief in God does improve people's morality, that doesn't mean that God is real. It just means they're externally motivated to do good rather than internally motivated.
Is another for Hamza, more on the natural explanation stuff. The question is, does God influence people's lives in some kind of empirically measurable way? I know you cited the well-being research that shows that people who participate in religious institutions are frequently happier. I think the question is there, well, that's any religious participation, right? Is there some reason to think that Allah, is he detectable in a detectable influence in the lives of Muslims?
That's a very good question, which relates to the comment that Dan Barker was actually talking about when he's saying there's evidence that born-again Christians, and there's no correlation between differences of religious or atheist groups. But then again, I was talking about longitudinal studies that don't just include born-again Christians, but all religions. So you can't use thousands of academic studies and bring something that's very small based on a specific community within the Christian community. That doesn't follow. And what I'm saying here is not that you need the moral motivation of fear of hell to do good. All we're saying is the concept of God and loving Him and want to come close to Him actually is an added moral motivation to do good. So it takes already good people and makes them better. That's the point I'm trying to make. Now, in regards to, does the belief in Allah, does it change human life? That's the point here. Well, it should, essentially. The belief in God, or the belief in having an ultimate purpose, an ultimate vision, an ultimate meaning in life should change your life, because you're not in an existential anxiety anymore. Because if you really think about the logical conclusion of an atheist worldview, then we have a self-delusion. Because we say, I have purpose, I want to be a preacher, I want to be a Dan Barker, I want to be an engineer, I want to be a doctor. But it's self-delusion, because it's basically saying, let's pretend to have purpose. Because the underlying reality of our life is almost purposeless. And this is why the French existentialists like Jean-Paul Sartre and many others who talked about the nausea of existence. Albert Camus, the half-French, half-Algerian philosopher, said existence is nauseating because it's purposeless. Why is it here? Arthur Schopenhauer, what did he say? He wrote an essay on suicide. So did David Hume, by the way. And basically, Arthur Schopenhauer was basically saying, I wish the universe never existed, because he really thought about existence itself. And I would argue that many of us, we don't think about existence anymore, what it means to exist. You know why? We have the iPhone, we have email, we have Facebook, we have Twitter, we have kids, we have 9 to 5. Or in America, it's like 8 to 8. You guys work too hard, man. Yeah? You have capitalism, the drive to earn more. We define ourselves by a lot of external things sometimes, unfortunately. Yeah? So the point is, we have all these things that veil our thinking. There was a Times magazine study done that took normal professionals and said to them, think about your life for 12 hours. No work, no nothing, think. 80% of them, or more than 80%, they broke down. Because they suspended those existential questions. What does it mean to be me? What does it mean to exist? And that's why the Quran talks about this existential question, saying, if you reject God, God will make you reject your own self. Because worshipping God is so intrinsic to who you are. Because you're going to worship something anyway. You submit yourself to the pilot when you're on the plane. You're not going to go on the plane to the pilot saying, I don't want to submit to you, let me ride the plane. Yeah? Then you have to pray to God because you're going to die, man. Yeah, as I say, there's no atheist on a sinking ship. Which is quite interesting, because there was a study done about the Titanic, right? And when there were people like basically on the boats and they were freezing, they would die of pneumonia or whatever they call hypothermia, and all the atheists were actually, guess what they were doing? They were praying. They were praying. What else are they going to do? You might as well pray. Yeah? So that was quite interesting. I thought it was a funny thing to add anyway. I can send you the link. It's BBC Files. BBC British something broadcasting, yeah? Anyway, so the point is, God should have an effect on your lives. And we believe adopting the concept of oneness of God should have an effect on your life. Think about it. If you accept that there's one powerful deity being that you should worship and that's your life, that frees you from the shackles of creation. It shouldn't give you an inferiority complex anymore. It means that you don't have a lack of self-esteem. It means that you can't blame aspects of the material world for your problems. You take responsibility now. You don't have this kind of abstract determinism, like, oh, it's social conditioning, I'm always going to be like this. That's what the Quran says, take responsibility. It's a very existential point it's trying to say. Now, think about this point that we believe in the Quran. We say, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, which basically means there is no true power apart from the power of God. Imagine you internalize that. Imagine what that can do to a human being. It means that everybody in this room, or any material thing in the world, cannot prevent you from doing the thing that you want to achieve in life. Like, the material doesn't have true power, true efficacy. Because usually the true power is God. Because everything happens as a result of His power and will. So that frees you. That gives you the intellectual and emotional space to create a new realm of possibility for yourself. Just by that concept. Imagine that, if you internalize that concept. Well, fine, if you don't believe in it, and well, that's a different discussion. But conceptually, if you were to internalize such a concept, it can free you from these kind of shackles. And it's called the blind spot. Because we have blind spots in our lives. We know what we know. For example, I know that I'm Greek, although I look Pakistani, yeah? I know, for example, that I have a white shirt on, right? I know I've gained weight recently, yeah? It's your pancakes, beautiful American diners are the best, man. Wake up in the morning, have your cakes, overeat cakes, eggs over easy, beautiful.
That's capitalism.
Not really. It's called food. It's a bit of a difference. I mean, communists don't eat, socialists don't eat. You know what? The only people that eat are capitalists. Yeah? Anyway, so the point I'm trying to say is, I know that I know certain things, but I also know that I don't know certain things. For example, I don't know anything about rocket science, so I know that I don't know about rocket science. But there's an aspect of our life that we don't know, that we don't know, that we don't know. And that's what you call the blind spot in your life. And you could only free that if you have concepts like, there is no true power but God, because it gives you the new realm of possibility to achieve things that you can achieve. It's an existential point. It's quite deep, but it requires more discussion, but that's the point I'm trying to say. TikTok? Thank you.
Okay, I've selected a couple that are more on point. It should be short, concise answers. So this is for Dan. The question is, so you said that if something doesn't take up space, it doesn't exist. Do the following things exist? Time, human will, numbers, gravity. If so, how much space do they take up?
So who's the preacher?
You're so influential, man.
You barely touched on the answer, but I agree with you. Any chance to preach? I was a preacher. Did you know the word reverend was a typo? Did you know that? The first letter was originally an N. Time is not a thing. Time is not a thing. Time is a concept. It's a dimension. It's like, how tall is this podium? Well, we measure it, we assign a 0 point to this podium, and then we measure so many centimeters up to here. But how long is the dimension? It's meaningless to talk about how long is the dimension. There is no such thing as a dimension. It's a concept in our brains by which we make measurements. So time and space, those things are dimensions. The other concepts that we talk about, yes, there are many concepts that exist, but a concept exists only within a brain. Just because I have a concept of something doesn't mean that it exists out there. That's called reification. When a brain is functioning and it's making labels to refer to objects or other functionings of the brain, even the word mind is just a description of a function. There's no such thing as a mind. The only thing is the brain. Then these things can be measured. You can look at mental activity, you can look at neurons firing, and you can say, oh yes, that person is having a concept within their brain. But things like love and justice and free will, those are labels for concepts that define actions. They're not actually, you can't go out and buy love at a store. You can't go out and measure justice. You can't, you can physically. If a God exists, a God is a being with a functioning mind of some sort. Somehow this mind is functioning, and it's functioning in a complex way. This mind is functioning in a way that you would say, well, if you found a watch on the ground and it was functioning, you would have to say, wow, how can that just be functioning without a designer? Well, isn't the mind of the designer even more functional and more complex than the thing that it designed? If there is this all-powerful Allah, its functioning brain has to be some kind of a thing up there, and by the design argument reasoning, that God also has to have a God. Because otherwise you're just explaining one mystery with another mystery. You haven't explained anything. What evolution does is explains complexity not from more complexity, but how complexity arises from simplicity. So I think it's a mistake. Whoever asked the question, there's a tendency to reify a concept to turn it into a thing, and to think it, and God is a concept, and in Hamza's mind, that concept becomes a thing. He actually thinks God exists in reality somewhere. He actually thinks that idea that was in the mind of Muhammad is actually a being that exists somewhere outside of reality. He's reifying or deifying a concept.
Then we're pretty much out of time. One more question. Again, a pretty focused one. The writing styles of the authors Emily Dickinson and E. Cummings are very unique. Does this make them messengers of Allah?
Yeah, that's a very good question. What do you mean by unique? That's the question. Now, I would argue that if you look at every single piece of literature, if a blueprint exists, you can emulate its literary form. For example, in English language, we have the iambic pentameter. In Greek language, we have various forms. In the Arabic language, we have poetry, for example, that have to adhere to the 16 rhythmical patterns called the al-bihar, and so forth and so forth. You have these literary forms. I'm not talking about aesthetic reception. How do they use the rhetorical devices? Where are the embellishments? Where is the eloquence? We're not really talking about this. Well, that's an argument in itself. I'm talking about the structural features of a particular language. When you speak in English, there's only certain forms that you could speak in. Poetry, normal speech, prose, half prose, etc. what kind of poetic forms you use. Those are not entirely unique. You just have to use them because you're expressing yourself in a particular language. What I'm saying is that the Quran itself de-scopes the Arabic language. Every time you try and express yourself, you're never going to achieve the literary form of the Quran, even though you exhaust the finite grammatical rules, the finite letters of the Arabic language, and the finite words. This is what we mean by an act of impossibility, because we go to the nature of the event being the Quran, and the nature being the Arabic language. We exhaust all possibilities, and we can't bring the unique literary form of the Quran. And this is why I mentioned Western academics that even support this type of view. Now the point is, if we're thinking human beings, and this is true, well, let's think about this. It does make an act of impossibility, and if it does, then it conforms to the description of a miracle that I mentioned in my presentation. It's a valid question, but even when you to look at these types of works, you would see that there are particular forms that can be replicated, as we gave the example of Shakespeare and many others. So this is an interesting subject. I mean, for more information, you go to my website, right? It's not selling anything, it's articles, yeah? HamzaTzortzis.com, and under Exploring the Quran, there is a chapter called The Challenge of the Quran, which has been authorized by scholars in Medina University in Saudi Arabia as well. And also, if you want more information, you go to theinimitable.quran.com. You could challenge it, let's have questions, let's have an email dialogue, let's have a discussion. And we basically see the Quran for what it is with regards to its linguistic and literary miracle. So I hope I answered the question, gave you more food for thought, and maybe an avenue to read around as well. An interesting book is Neil Robertson's book. Yeah, he was an Orientalist, and he was from Lancaster University in England, and it's called The Quran, A Contemporary Approach to a Veiled Text. It's in the English language, and it makes you understand the kind of uniqueness of the Quranic discourse. And he actually converted to Islam as a result of that. It's a highly academic study, but it's also done in layman language. So it's Neil Robinson, the Quran, I forgot what I said. It must be, I don't know, what is it? That's it. A veiled, something. See what's happening now? It's just your energy, man. It's like it's engulfing me. No, I'm only kidding. Anyway, just type in Neil Robinson and the Quran, A Contemporary Approach to a Veiled Text. There you go. I found it eventually. Thank you. Anyway, very nice having you guys. Thank you for hosting me. I'm from Britain. I went through immigration, which was a great thing. Thank you. Yeah? Thank you very much.
Thank you to Cash and to Building Blocks and to Dan, to Hamza. It was a fun night.